When we think about the ocean's food chain, we usually picture, big fish eating smaller fish. But what if one of the deadliest predators in the sea was actually microscopic? What if it was something we usually think of as a simple plant? Well, today we're diving into the very strange case of the algae that hunts. And this isn't some hypothetical scenario. This is the bill. $300 million. That was the absolutely staggering economic cost of a single devastating event in the waters of northern Norway, way back in 2019. An event caused by something so small it's almost invisible. So the devastation was kicked off by a massive bloom of algae, but this was no ordinary bloom. It was a massacre. And for a long time, the motive, the why this tiny little organism turned so deadly was a complete mystery. But now we're going to follow the clues and solve it.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's the spring of 2019, and a total catastrophe is unfolding in the fjords that are home to Norway's vital salmon farming industry. It seemed to happen overnight. Millions of fish just started dying.
The sheer scale of this is just mind-boggling. More than 14,000 metric tons of salmon just gone. To put that in perspective, that's 2% of the entire country's harvested fish for the whole year, wiped out in one single event. You can imagine the stakes were incredibly high to figure out what was going on, and fast. So who or what was the prime suspect behind this massive loss of life? Well, the investigation quickly zeroed in on one organism, a type of phytoplankton that was basically carpeting the fjords in a gigantic bloom. And here it is, Chrysochromulina leadbeateri. It's a single-celled alga so tiny you could fit thousands of them on the head of a pin. Now, normally it's just a harmless photosynthesizer, at the very bottom of the food web. So the big question was, how could something this small cause so much damage? To find out, scientists went straight to the crime scene. This map here shows where they focused their efforts, the fjord systems up in northern Norway. They really centered their work in a place called Balsfjorden, which was the absolute epicenter of this deadly algal bloom. And their scientific method was actually pretty clever. They compared Balsfjorden, the crime scene, with another similar fjord, Porsingerfjorden, which acted as their control because, well, it had no toxic bloom. By comparing the two, they hoped they could figure out what made the algae in Balsfjorden go so wrong. But as the scientists started digging into the data from the two fjords, they found something that just didn't make any sense at all. A complete paradox. So they used this really powerful technique called metaomics. The easiest way to think about this is like pulling a complete digital footprint or an activity log from the algae. It doesn't just tell you that the algae are there, it tells you what they're doing, which of their genes are being switched on or off. Okay, so clue number one came from the chlorophyll levels. These bright colors you see in Balsfjorden show the algae population was absolutely exploding. It was thriving. So far, no surprise there. But then, here's the paradox. In those exact same areas, the levels of inorganic phosphate, which is basically the algae's main food, were completely bottoming out. So the population was booming, but it was apparently running out of fuel.
So this became the central mystery, right? It's like finding a car that's somehow accelerating up a hill, but its fuel gauge is on empty. How are these algae not just surviving, but actually booming when their main food source was just gone? What on earth was powering this massive toxic bloom?
And the answer, it turns out, was more incredible and, frankly, a lot more terrifying than anyone expected. This wasn't just a bloom. It was a hunt. This was a sophisticated and very deadly survival strategy. The scientists had to completely rethink how they saw this organism. You see, they'd been treating it like a tiny, simple plant. But what if it was also an animal? This led them to a concept called mixotrophy. It's basically a hybrid survival strategy. A mixotroph can get its energy from the sun, like a plant, but when nutrients get scarce, it can switch modes and start eating other organisms, like an animal. This little alga isn't just a plant, it's a part-time predator. And this right here, this is the smoking gun. Remember that genetic activity log we talked about? Well, when the scientists looked at the genes of the algae in the deadly bloom, they found something incredible. Genes associated with eating, literally cell eating, were switched into high gear. The algae had turned on their hunting genes. But to hunt, you need a weapon. You can't just chase down other microbes. And the scientists found it. This algae produces a potent, newly identified toxin, and they named it leadbeateri-1, or LBT1 for short. This was the murder weapon.
So here's how the attack works, play by play. The algae release the LBT1 toxin into the water. This toxin acts like a paralyzing dart, just immobilizing other small plankton. And once the prey is helpless, the algae moves in and consumes it, absorbing the nutrients it needs to grow. It wasn't just killing fish as some tragic side effect. It was literally killing to survive. You see, this discovery completely changes how we understand these harmful algal blooms. It gives us a whole new model for how these events can get so intense and last for so long, even when it looks like they should be running out of food. So let's just walk through this new model. A bloom starts out normally, just using up all the available nutrients in the water. But when those nutrients run low, that scarcity acts as a trigger. The algae then switch on their genes for making toxins and for hunting. They start killing and eating their competitors, which gives them a whole new source of fuel. And this allows the bloom not just to survive, but to keep dominating the entire ecosystem.
And that's the key takeaway here. That massive fish kill, it wasn't an accident. It was the direct result of a really sophisticated survival strategy. When this algae gets starved, it doesn't just die off. It becomes a predator, and it creates its own food supply.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty unsettling thought. This switch from plant to predator, it was triggered by a change in the environment, specifically that lack of nutrients. As our oceans keep warming and changing, nutrient cycles are being thrown off all over the world. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how often will these new conditions push other microscopic plants over the edge and turn them into hunters, too?